The price of food is beginning to increase at a slower rate. It's up 0.2% month over month in February compared to the 0.4% rise in the month prior. But the escalating global trade war could have a negative effect and send prices higher once again. That's what we're tracking up against here. And joining me now, we've got Richard Volpe, who is the former USDA economist and Cal Poly professor of agribusiness. Good to have you back on the program. Always value your insights. How are you viewing the potential impacts of tariffs on food prices?
Well, yeah, thank you for having me. Been getting a lot of questions about tariffs recently, and what makes this challenging is that the situation is so fluid. As I'm sure most of your listeners know, the tariffs are announced, and the tariffs are sort of partially pulled back, and then in some cases immediately pulled back entirely. There's absolutely no question that tariffs with our major trade partners represents a distortion. And, in the short term, just market distortions almost always increase prices. So it is something that I'm concerned about since we just wrapped up, 2024 was a year of below average food price inflation. There was a little bit of relief for customers. Despite all the headlines about eggs and a little bit about beef and sugar and a few other commodities, most food prices right now are still trended in that direction towards, lower than average food price inflation and increased affordability. Tariffs have the potential to change that, but the extent to which tariffs could affect food prices, of course, depends on the countries they're being slapped on, the perishability of the products we're talking about, the importance of imports to how much of it we consume or we eat in the U.S. And then another factor that I heard you talk about with a previous guest are the recently announced tariffs on, steel and aluminum, these sort of fundamental industrial building blocks. They don't often get talked about with respect to food, but there's absolutely no question those are going to drive up packaging and storage and transportation costs for food. They have the potential to drive those costs up in a big way.
Yeah, and this has a lot of the food and beverage industry executives trying to make their case for certain exemptions so that they don't get it and have to then pass that price on to the consumer. But I guess from your early evaluation and predictive analysis, based on what we've seen in the past, are there parts of the basket and which parts of the shopping cart are most prone, based on the countries that we're having the negotiations with, most prone to potentially seeing higher prices in this near term?
I think let's assume that the tariffs that President Trump has announced or threatened with Canada and Mexico, if we assume that they go fully into effect at the rates they've been announced, then I would expect to see the quickest and largest impacts with respect to fruits, vegetables, beef, and liquor. Those are the areas where we can expect to see those impacts, because we're talking about commodities when we talk about beef, tomatoes, avocados, and then of course when we talk about tequila and certain beers and bottled liquors. Some of these products, our trade relationships with Canada and Mexico account for nearly all of our domestic consumption. So it's not like we have other trade partners that we can pivot to if these tariffs go into effect. There's really no choice but for these food companies, these importers and manufacturers and so on, to sort of pass those on to consumers because they're already operating on thin margins.
While we have you, I want to talk about a development that we've seen out of a major company, a household known name in Dole. They are taking some efforts and actually raising their pineapple prices, but as we think about the broader kind of citrus category, if you will, that Dole is known for, especially in the fruits and whatnot, how are you evaluating this, and what are the other foods that could potentially be in danger of some of those price fluctuations higher?
Yeah, that's a great point. We haven't really been talking about citrus fruit much recently. Of course, eggs have been dominating the headlines, and I'm actually kind of thankful that we haven't been talking about eggs today. But citrus is facing sort of a two-pronged assault right now. Domestically, as a lot of folks know, citrus greening is a disease vector that's affecting citrus production in the southeast United States, mostly Florida. We don't have an answer to it yet. Producers don't have a solution to it. So we're seeing the production of processing fruit in the American Southeast declining really rapidly, and that's already translated into a higher cost for orange juice, as a great example. And then there's sort of a latitudinal belt on the globe that stretches from Central South America over to Africa that's been experiencing a lot of wild weather in the last few months. And that's been affecting everything from, you mentioned pineapples to other citrus fruits to avocados at some point to sugar and to cocoa. And these are all categories that right now we're starting to see inflation really pick up. So a lot of it has to do with weather. The domestic issue, the domestic side of that right now is sort of systemic, and we're looking at that to be baked into the cake for years to come.
Oh my goodness. All right. You've given me a new rabbit hole to go down after I get off the set here. Huanglongbing, I believe it's called, as the technical name, HLB for citrus screening, as you were mentioning. I'm going to be looking into it a little bit more. Ricky, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks. It was great.